Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, resource restrictions put in place by some cloud providers and significant price cuts being provided by some others. Also, VMware EUC's new name has possibly been revealed, and a new Spectre Mitigation has been released. Yes, really, a new Spectre Mitigation has been released. What is this? 7 years after it was first disclosed. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which as always is brought to you by my sponsors, and that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And of course, also brought to you by Netrix Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud, or MDM to remove local admin rights, manage and lock down applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. If you enjoy the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. The Register has reported that Alibaba is cutting prices for international users of its core compute, storage, and database services. Reportedly, discounts of between 30 and 59% have been applied to Alibaba's Elastic Compute service, but without information on which instance types those offers cover, according to the Register. The object service storage resource price has been slashed, with 1 year of 500 gigabytes package dropping from $63 to just $16.99. There is some speculation of the motive in the Register article, but for me, I only really care that this may result in other vendors or cloud providers following suit. Perhaps this is an indication that supply chain issues in China that have been plaguing infrastructure in general, but also the cloud providers who rely on infrastructure over the last few years, may be easing and resources are increasing. Perhaps it's going to be a higher supply to meet demand to hopefully combat price surges and also hopefully alleviate those issues that have been going on the last few years, where suddenly certain services were not being offered in various regions due to resource constraints. So I guess we'll have to wait and see, but hopefully this is a positive. Whilst there was good news from Alibaba and price drops, and also I was speculating that hopefully there's more available resources to prevent the likes of Azure and other cloud providers from restricting services in some regions. Well, AWS is reportedly restricting the number of resources users can access in Ireland amid ongoing concerns about the amount of power consumed by the nation's data centers. So, very interesting and also very different, because this is not a case of, well, we don't have enough storage or we don't have enough compute in this region. It's actually because of power consumption. Amazon's cloud platform is periodically limiting its access to its Ireland-based EU West 1 region, according to a report by the Register. Energy-intensive instances, such as those where GPUs are deployed to run AI workloads, are said to be particularly impacted by the restrictions. The Register quotes an affected AWS user who said, quote, "You cannot spin up GPU nodes in AWS Dublin as those locations are maxed out power-wise. There is reserved capacity for EC2 just in case, and if you have a problem with that, AWS Europe will point you at spare capacity in Sweden and other parts of the EU." End quote. This is pretty interesting, as I said, as for some time there has been concern in Ireland about the number of data centers operating here. Our national grid reportedly demands large energy users to reduce their workloads in times of high demand, so this restriction by AWS is not all that surprising given that, but it is a little surprising because famously, Amazon actually bought a wind farm in Ireland, I believe in Donegal, and our weather has been even worse than usual, so they must be driving extremely high usage right now. And I guess, as alluded to, this is because of the AI demand, as the article suggests. But this is worrying because AI proliferation is only going to increase, so the compute resources and the power drain is going to increase too. Where I live in Galway, we've been witnessing many wind turbines arriving into the city's port, with plans to dramatically increase the number of wind turbines on land and offshore. This could help with the data center demand, but ideally, in my opinion, it would instead be used to keep the island self-sufficient first and foremost, and perhaps provide a valuable energy source to our homes. The people of Ireland should get some benefit from living in this miserable weather 5 to 6 months out of the year, in my opinion. Let's not just farm it all off to these large data centers. But, starting off the news this week with two very interesting stories related to cloud providers. And I'm sure this energy consumption problem is going to not just play out in Ireland, but in other regions too. Ars Technica published an article warning that a vulnerability in a firewall product from Palo Alto Networks, specifically PAN-OS 10.2, PAN-OS 11, and or PAN-OS 11.1, carries a 10 out of 10 on the severity scale and has been under active exploitation for about 2 weeks already. It gets the highest severity rating as it does not require authentication to be exploited and is being tracked as CVE-2024-3400. Palo Alto Networks has yet to patch this vulnerability, but it is urging affected customers to follow the workaround and mitigation guidance they've published. So if you use these Palo Alto products, be sure to apply the mitigations or workarounds as quickly as possible. Speaking of vulnerabilities with a 10 out of 10 on the severity scale, and one that does not require authentication to be exploited, a vulnerability has been disclosed in Rust standard library to target Windows systems in command injection attacks. According to bleepycomputer.com, this one's tracked as CVE-2024-24576, and this flaw is due to OS command and argument injection weaknesses that can let attackers execute unexpected and potentially malicious commands on the operating system. An attacker could be able to control the arguments passed to the spawn processes and execute arbitrary shell commands by bypassing an escape. The severity of this vulnerability is critical if you are invoking batch files on Windows with untrusted arguments. No other platform or use is affected, according to the article. All Rust versions before version 1.77.2 on Windows are affected if a program's code or one of its dependencies invokes and executes batch files with untrusted arguments. Interestingly, the article suggests that it's specific to invoking batch files on Windows with untrusted arguments and that no other platforms are affected, yet Flat Security are suggesting that other programming languages are also affected, and not all of them have been patched. For example, Go, Java, Node.js, Python, Ruby, PHP, and more. There is some advice for developers contained in the article by bleepycomputer.com about this vulnerability, and of course, be sure to check out the CV for more. This is particularly interesting, as you may recall if you listened to previous episodes of the podcast, that Microsoft is moving to change some of its code base to Rust because it's deemed more secure. So this is a little bit of a hiccup for a reportedly more secure alternative. Thanks to my buddy Ruben for this, who shared on Twitter that VMware posted an advisory about transitioning support from VMware to Broadcom, and it contains a note that says, quote, starting 6th May 24, end-user computing customers should contact EUC support at https://customerconnect.omnissa.com for any technical needs, which may suggest Omnissa is to be the new name for VMware EUC. The name Omnissa was registered as a trademark by VMware back on January 19th, 2024, and the name has been met with a giant meh from the community, as the general consensus is that it is a meaningless name. But maybe there is meaning behind it, and maybe there will be clarity provided when it has been formally announced. Maybe. Let's see. Citrix have shared that they have signed a new 8-year partnership agreement with Microsoft. It includes development of new cloud and AI solutions with an integrated product roadmap. Additionally, Cloud Software Group will make a $1.65 billion commitment to the Microsoft Cloud and its generative AI capabilities. Under the partnership, Citrix is the preferred Microsoft Global Azure Partner Solution for enterprise desktop as a service when collaborating with joint Azure customers. The companies would jointly support customer success, offer tailored solutions, expert guidance, and support to accelerate customers' cloud journeys, according to the press release. Additionally, Citrix will leverage Microsoft Azure as its preferred cloud solution, providing Citrix customers with the comprehensive benefits of the Citrix platform, complemented by Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. So this is interesting. I'm assuming this is the first such partnership since Citrix has been acquired. I wonder if this will indicate a truly closer collaboration and partnership going forward. They've thrown around the word like preferred in a couple of instances there. Does that mean that Citrix is going to be basically the marquee player in terms of partners, or is Microsoft going to be more open with other partners too? Hopefully this does not result in Citrix just putting all their eggs in the AVD and Windows 365 basket. It says complemented by AVD and Windows 365. I would hope they continue to innovate and develop their own tool set and core products going forward, and not just supplement the Microsoft technologies. Microsoft confirmed an issue with user rights for those on Microsoft Intune 23H2 security baselines and using a non-English OS. A hotfix has been deployed, but if you've already been affected by this, you can correctly apply the user rights settings on non-English operating systems and then create a new profile, as the fix is not retroactive. Microsoft marked as resolved a severe bug preventing PCs with specific Intel 11th generation Rocket Lake processors from successfully running Windows 11. While a fix for affected PCs already on Windows 11 was issued within weeks of the bug being discovered in 2021, only this past Friday were affected PCs finally allowed to actually upgrade to Windows 11 from Windows 10. So that block has now been lifted for anyone on those Intel 11th generation Rocket Lake processors. Microsoft recently shared an updated advisory for Windows users regarding the Spectre vulnerabilities, which had plagued Intel processors of all generations. The advisory contains a registry tweak that can be made to enable mitigations. This is off the back of new software techniques to identify and potentially exploit hardware that's vulnerable. So I believe the first public disclosure of the Spectre vulnerability was back in 2017. And of course, the mitigations that were recommended had a performance impact. And it appears that while this is just like a registry tweak, it still leads to a performance impact when enabled. But it seems like it's going to be prudent for those who may be vulnerable to use this registry tweak, as there's new techniques being used to discover and exploit the vulnerability. In a follow-up to a previously reported story on this podcast, Microsoft is now trialing the placement of ads in the Start menu on Windows 11. You may find this behavior in the beta channel for Windows 11 Insider Preview build version 22635.3495, but you may not, because they're only appearing for a small subset of US-based users at this time. So anyone in any other region will not see them. And if you're in the US, you may see them, but you may not. During this test phase, users can turn the ads off from Settings, Personalization, Start, and by toggling off the Show Recommendations for Tips, App Promotions, and More option. And now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up, I strongly recommend checking out the awesome Ruben's Industry Bento box that's hosted on Dizzion.com's blog. It features a whole lot of useful stories and resources that are current, so over the last few weeks. So be sure to check that out. If you like this podcast and you like getting information from here, I'm sure you'll like Ruben's curated list too. The awesome Dave Brett has shared a new tool that he's developed called EUC Profile Buddy that allows administrators and end users to manage their profile from a system tray application or command line, and you can get specific details about configuration settings as well as perform common tasks. Just more cool shit from Dave, who I was using the monitoring platform in my previous day-to-day IT job. It was awesome, and this looks awesome too. The Workplace Ninjas have a call for speakers, and they've announced several events all over Europe, including the UK, Switzerland, and more. So if you're interested in speaking or even just attending an event, because it looks like admission is free, check out wpninjas.uk or .com or whatever region. I think there's .dk as well, whichever region's yours. And finally, thanks to Thorsten, who shared this one, there's a tool called WhatChanged, and they've released version 1.07. This is a free utility that scans for modified files and registry entries. It's used for checking program installations, and personally, what I would probably use this for, I used an old tool called InstallRite that was very handy. I'd use it actually for like first launch or for runtime to see what an application is writing on that first launch to possibly capture it into a virtualized application or something like that. Hey, but that's the end of this episode. It's a shorter one than usual, and it got out earlier than usual. That is because I'm going to EUC Unplugged. If you're going to be at the event, be sure to say hello. And for those not going to the event who are just looking for the next episode, I should hopefully get back to the regular cadence next week. Thank you, and thanks for listening.